This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Heretic 2 by Matthew J. DiStefano. Ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about faith? In Heretic 2, I dive into LGBTQ affirmation, rejecting divine violence, and embracing universalism in a bold post-Christian perspective. If you're done with outdated dogma and want a justice-oriented, inclusive view of spirituality, then this book is for you. Get Heretic 2 wherever books are sold and start rethinking faith today. This Choircast podcast is brought to you by High Minds. Join host Andy Colenso and Matthew J. DiStefano as they tackle culture, justice, spirituality, and all the big questions shaping our world. High Minds isn't about talking points or hot takes. It's about deep, insightful conversation that inspires and challenges. Tune in to explore new angles, question the status quo, and elevate your thinking. Listen to High Minds wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Radical Love Life, an ongoing series of conversations with thought leaders exploring faith outside the boxes, hosted by Mark Dilcomb and Kelly Wilson.
Well, I loved Maria's refusal of a kind of sophisticated form of liberal biblical literalism that, we can easily return to the pristine text and know exactly who Jesus is.
Primitive.
That when we do it, we get a liberal or progressive Jesus. When fundamentalists do it, and she refuses rightly that option, regardless of who does it.
I love that.
Just because
Textual literalism. That's
Yeah.
this down. That is so good.
I say it in part because, of course, we're all tempted to do it. Part of what it means to be modern is to be wedded to a kind of radical literalism. It is a defining feature of the modern. Literalism in our sense was not a feature of ancient readings of these texts. So when we actually engage in literalism, we're being hyper modern. So when Maria says, don't do it, folks, whether you do it in a left-leaning way or a right-leaning way, she's actually getting us out of a modern trap and then inviting us into the work of imagination. So we read the text to find a certain kind of attunement. And then we start saying, well, if I'm radically attuned to the imagination of these texts, what would it look like to live a Christianly now? Which is not going to be identical to what living Christianly looks like in first century Palestine. So I love that. I think the task then is really the work of imagination. So I just deeply want to second that. I'm not as anti-doctrinal as many are. I mean, I'm an Anglican priest.
Middle
There's
way.
that.
No.
Yeah. So I don't.
Go ahead, Dan.
And also, it should be worth noting that this year marks the 700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. So you're going to see a lot of people celebrating and thinking about the meaning of Nicene doctrine, 325 to 2025. So we're going to be thinking a lot about doctrine this year.
That's true, 1700 years.
You have a good point.
Yeah,
You said 700, but 1700. But you're
sorry,
right.
1700, right.
So inside of that, and it's kind of a follow-up that I have, we're in this either or state, and Jesus, our faith is all about both and. And this is a good example. So even in my own space for the longest time, I did the either or. It's like, well, I am simply going to dismiss all doctrine and dogma. It's like, but yet I find comfort and joy in practicing within an institution, and I celebrate the reasons why doctrine happens. So I'm certainly not asking you to throw over, your priesthood and what your vocation is, or Maria for you either. It's like, okay, I just miss all of that, of course, but it is both and where you can hold up, and everybody being on their unique journey, they're going to have those moments if they're anything like where, like, yeah, I don't want to be around doctrine right now, but I still have faith to do what, Maria, you said. I am going to pursue because I am called to pursue.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, if doctrine is also, like scripture, held in captivity to literalism, then we're going to get the same problems with doctrine that we get with scriptural literalism. The core intention of Nicaea 325 is to affirm the possibility of becoming divine, right? If Jesus didn't really become human all the way, including flesh, then this here flesh, to quote Cole Arthur Riley's gorgeous book, this here flesh can't become divine, right? So Nicaea read in its deepest intention is a way of saying God became really flesh, really material, and the really material can become divine. So it's actually a kind of grounding for spirituality of theosis. And so you can't say that it wasn't really God who became divine, because God can't enter into this messy stuff, right? And all the ways in which that leads to a kind of Gnosticism that denies materiality and flesh and sex and gender and so forth.
Dualism.
Yeah. So
flesh bad
and
spirit.
So if you can live into and understand that the power of and possibility, rather than wielding doctrine as a kind of blunt thing in order to, well, if you don't believe this, you're out, right? It becomes some kind of test rather than a kind of grounding for the work we're going to do spiritually. So I think Mark is exactly right. If you're going to wield doctrine as a kind of punitive instrument of, you're either with us or you're against us, I have no interest in doctrine wielded in those ways, but doctrine as a guide for spirituality at its best and its deepest, that I'm fine with. Do I need people in my community to give cognitive assent to doctrine? Well, I'm not sure cognitive assent ever changed anyone about anything, right? I want transformation, not information.
Yeah, I love that.
And if doctrine can serve the interests of transformation, go for it. If it's an information test for belonging, and also a kind of authoritarian move, right? I get to say that you don't belong because I'm now using doctrine as a test of your faithfulness, as you're willing, as a measure of your willingness to subdue your own intellectual passions and curiosity. If you can kill your mind in order to belong, and I can see that you do because you're submitting to me, it's really a power game, right? It's using doctrine as a way of assessing your willingness to forgo your intellect. And I don't want any part of that. That's not what it means to use doctrine in a healing, life-giving way. But do I think that doctrine can function in those life-giving ways? Oh yeah, it can, but it has to be done responsibly.
Well said. Yeah, we've seen some of our some of our friends, some of the folks that we've interviewed on this podcast, actually lose their credentials within certain institutions because what they believe is outside the doctrine prescribed by that institution. It's just amazing to me that it isn't necessarily what they do. It's that we detect that the private beliefs of your mind are different than this list of 10 or 15 precepts that we have. Therefore, you can't belong to our community anymore.
Well, Kelly, you speak of one person in particular who John knows, who shared that stage that I witnessed in that case. And we're
right. Talking about Tom Ord and the Church of the Nazarene.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. Thank you. It is heartbreaking that they brought him up on, tribunal and basically, run out of his church, right? Because he went from private to public And yet he was simply asking the question, what you both have just shared there, what can we imagine? In this case, it was over queer affirmation within the Nazarene denomination, because one of his kids is queer, and they wrote that book. And of course, and some of the other things that he's hit as well in open relational theology, as he is in that space. And they simply wouldn't have it. And Kelly also, I think, referring to who we can share, somebody we interviewed recently, Paul Dorminio, who happens to be Nazarene as well, felt into the corner that if he can leave, they would bring him up as well. He was a Nazarene pastor in New Jersey that he could not uphold what doctrine was. And so he knew his days were, and so he left before they got him.
Yeah, and this will drive out so many young people. It's like, it's a denomination committing harikari, you know? It's
And it's not just the Nazarene. Won't this happen with other denominations where you get into this? The Southern Baptist Convention, I use them all because they came first in mind. But even the fractures that we've seen in other the schisms of the Episcopal Church when they split with the Anglicans.
The ACNA and the...
Yes, and what just
and then the Methodists, yeah,
just at these huge levels.
You know, one of the
oh, sorry, go ahead, Kel.
Oh, I've been doing some research for writing piece lately, and I'm one of those people that Maria was talking about earlier, that I have been guilty of trying to excavate and, you know, get back to the primitive understanding of what Jesus was talking about. One of the things that I wonder what people do with when they get to this point is, I've gotten to, I've been reading Urbach's The Sages, looking at all these different Talmudic rabbis who were interpreting, you know, in the first century, and, you know, some of the thinking in the milieu that Jesus was in. And there were 15, 20, 25 different ways of interpreting any particular subject.
Yep.
And the religious community seemed okay with that. And which to me is mind blowing, because I'm like, there's only the one way. And to be able to hold all these different, often conflicting ideas and say, this rabbi says this, and this rabbi says this, and we hold those things in tension and we never really nail them down, that you don't see, like, the modern church seems very uncomfortable with any kind of ambiguity like that.
Yeah. Kelly, I mean, it's part of formal rabbinic training to pair up and generate compelling, distinctive readings of the text, and then to hash it out, and for your Torah study partner to come up with an alternative reading, and then you debate. So, and there are great rabbinic stories that even God can't intervene when God tries, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's an old story about the rabbis debating about, I think, the status of an oven and whether it's kosher or not. Forgive me for not remembering the exact details. And one partisan in the set, you know, in the conversation says, if I'm right, may this tree uproot itself, and it does. And the other rabbi says, well, if I'm right, may the walls of the study house begin to fall in, and it does. And you know, and they're holding opposite positions. And then finally, one appeals to a voice from heaven, and God says that, this rabbi is correct. And the other rabbi says back to God, how dare you intervene? The Torah is on earth, not in heaven. You gave us the Torah. It's now our work to interpret it. So there was a kind of an astonishing, generative narrative about how even appeals to like divine authorities from above is not going to, you know, resolve the hermeneutical situation, as Maria said. It's part of our spiritual labor to understand the meaning of our text, and even appeals to heavenly authority. The rabbi's silence. It's a mind-blowing story for Christians to hear. By the way, this is like a living testimony for why interfaith and interreligious study and comparative theology matters. Because when a Christian hears the story, the shaking that happens, even progressive theologians, right? Like, I want God to like settle certain disputes from above, obviously on my side of the debate. But the hermeneutical freedom that the rabbis are displaying by telling that story is stunning. It's like, oh my God.
I love it. Like not now, God. We're figuring this out.
We're figuring this out. Yeah.
Well, and I think
you told us to figure it out.
Right. Yeah. Reading
and
along
that
the reader.
type of like midrashic imagination is really like, I think, an innovation in religion for that time. And it's this idea of like every time you read, because these are oral communities, right? In these ancient communities, and so they're being told these stories, and every time they're being told, they're told a little bit different. They're adjusting based on context. Jesus, we'll move forward in history, and we'll look at the Gospels, and Jesus, he talks about the fig tree because he happened to be walking up, and a fig tree was there. If it was an olive grove, or maybe he would have chosen something different. A different story. I don't know, but they used sort of the natural understanding of what was around them. And then at some point it got crystallized and wrote down. And that's really oversimplifying the Bible, but some of it is quite like that. And even core doctrines for Christianity, like resurrection, that was a doctrinal innovation at the time. That doesn't go back to kind of the original priestly orders. It's not quite as old as the Sadducees. It's a doctrine that was sort of reimagined in exile to give people hope, because they were just so down and out, and really taking that whole exile thing right in the teeth as opposed to the chins, and they needed new ways to hope. Even as we look at the concept of holiness throughout the Old Testament, it looks different in every generation, and what God wants from God's people looks very different. Sometimes it's sacrifice, sometimes it's social justice, sometimes it's worship. It's a temple, it's an ark, it's a mountain, it's a bush. And I think sometimes we're just so used to, again, it goes back to that modern understanding of things, that everything is just supposed to fit. And when it doesn't, it doesn't work, and it's really uncomfortable. But actually, like, everything's in flux, including our holy scriptures. And it's what makes them holy. It's what makes all of this holy, is that it was beautifully written by human hands, for human communities that were undergoing, to use John's word earlier, transformation. And that doesn't mean that what we believe or understand to be God and the divine, or whatever word you want to use, didn't have a hand in all that. It just means that it was a joint, a really big joint creative effort. And there are ways of reading that then, and there are certainly ways of reading and interpreting.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. Looking at different phases and seeing where, certain ideas changed, where even just like the rewards and punishments for behavior switched from being, you either got your crops rained on or not, to being projected into the afterlife. I always used to think of that as like, aha, that's a human innovation. Therefore it's incorrect. It's something that people made up because they wanted. But I've been contemplating it, and I was like, is the pressure of human imagination because society wants or needs something to be, is that actually an act of co-creation with God? Like, that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. I mean, it could actually mean it's more right than what they had before.
Oh,
yeah, go on.
Go ahead, Kelly. Go ahead, Maria.
I was just going to say, I think this is where kind of the modern conversation on deconstruction just really is undermining a lot of kind of the profound layered thought of, the history and the tradition of Scripture, because it's like, oh, well, evangelicals say inerrant and infallible, and clearly it's full of errors, and we don't believe this and we don't believe that. I just think you're re-entrenching just on the other side of things. You wanted freedom, but you've just shackled yourself to the other end of the polarity here, and just re-entrenched in the same idea of fundamentalism. You're just sort of playing for the other team. Inerrancy and infallibility, if you even want to use that language anymore, I don't know if anyone does, but if I don't, but if one does, we can take that conversation up a few layers and say the authority is in the story, right? The authority is in the narrative, and that will always have transformative power. Grammar and translation and when something was dated, that is a boring 20th century conversation and what I don't want to be a part of. So yeah, just how these things are talked about and where people find their justification in how they talk about things is interesting to me. But I don't know if that was helpful, but it was what I wanted to share.
It's very helpful, and I wanted to say that under the inspiration of my dear friend Catherine Keller, I write and think a lot about theopoetics, and it goes back to the theme of imagination, and a theopoetic way of thinking about both scripture and our own religious lives is about opening oneself up to the generativity, the space of creativity in which the divine can show up, right? So, I mean, this is so elemental to anyone who writes, right? It can be a poem, it can be an argument, but when you write, most of us, even if you happen to be an atheist, have a sense that this is a joint authored project, right? Something else shows itself other than my deliberative, rational mind. And in the work of the craft, I am being formed as I generate. Am I suddenly becoming infallible? Oh, I might generate boneheaded stuff, but nonetheless, there is this feeling that something else is at work in me, and I am becoming otherwise by becoming vulnerable to the work of craft, of imagination, of writing with longing and passion. If you don't do that, if you aren't working to generate your own religious imagination, you're not opening yourself up to the holy. You're citing the past. You're citing how God worked in the lives of other people, but you're not permitting the same thing to happen to you. What kind of impoverished religious life is that? Right? It's not letting God be God in you. Yeah. By letting God do the generative work in you. But I will footnote what God said to Moses then in some literal way. But of course, the literal that I come up with is my definition, right? Because the generativity isn't there. Something new isn't happening. So I'm imposing a willed modern meaning upon an ancient text and then giving it divine sanction. This is all coercion.
And it's arrogant.
It's totally arrogant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
instead of that beautiful naked vulnerability of trying to write a thing or preach a thing and let something else transpire in you.
Well, and it's like when you look at the Old Testament, people say, oh, Yahweh was a genocidal maniac and he would go on these killing sprees. And well, yeah, that was God's people's understanding of their God at that moment. And whether or not those things empirically happened, it was important for them to record it for whatever reason. And if we look deeper into Yahwehism and Yahweh cult of, ancient Canaanite and, ancient Palestine understandings of all, we can get a little bit deeper into all this. And it's actually super interesting. And I love delving into it. And why don't we do that instead of being like, oh, I'm not preaching out of that text? Because it's, like you said, John, just imposing our boring and anemic, modern understandings of literature. And we don't read any other literature like this. That's the thing. We don't read the newspaper like this. We don't read novels like this. We let them have their way with us. But we won't allow scripture to do that. So
beautifully said. So just in this element of this moment of the conversation, that I love the word generative because that's exactly what's happening just in this moment. These are the kinds of conversations that people are denied either through institution because they don't operate within that kind of space, or people are denied because they are like, I'm checked out. I don't want to be a part of this conversation. And so we lock ourselves into these boxes. We are this or we are that. And, and I think something that John, I give you credit to from 5 years ago when you said it, and it holds so true. One's atheism is only as good as one's deism. And I've always clung onto that the moment you said that evening of a live event that brings us full circle to our 100th episode. You said that. I'm like, oh my God, if you have shitty theism, you're going to be a shitty atheist, right?
God, yes.
Yes. It is fundamentally as simple as that. And we have been let down. I'm not looking for place blame at anybody's feet for how this has happened. But we have a lot of shitty theology out there and a lot of shitty atheism out there, and just a lot of it that, because it's not generative, it doesn't allow people to break open and have these conversations like this in the moment of not looking to pick the text apart to find what is true and what's not true, but just rather allow it to be what it is and have these kind of conversations. Dare we imagine what is moving with us? What is our humanity? What is that?
The toxic atheism that is in the public space, this bro dude atheism with its patriarchal, the four horsemen, and then they'll say just blasphemous things that they're culturally Christian, which what they mean is culturally white, right? Because it's a kind of Western supremacy that, Dawkins and these people, and the God they refuse is the classical, big O, omniscient, all-knowing God. But they reject the existence of that God, but they keep power as a thing to be worshipped, right? They don't actually deny the existence of, or even the desirability of a God who's all powerful, because a certain kind of masculine notion of power still controls them. So they reject the notion of God, but his attributes they keep but downloaded onto the white man who is now afforded all the power that God had, or Western civilization. And so, oh God, it's the worst atheism that you can imagine, right? No daring atheism. I mean, give me a Nietzschean atheism. And I could, it's at least a serious, passionate, intense, morally challenging, rigorous atheism. The atheism that passes for popular today is pablum. It's stomach churning in its thinness.
Right. It's so easy to.
I don't have any strong feelings about this, clearly.
No, none whatsoever, John.
But if the person, it's easy for the person who's painting the picture of God to then knock down the straw man that they've built. It's like they're talking to themselves in the bathroom. They're just getting the same echo of whatever it is that they're putting out. But they say, if God is this, and this, then there is no God. And it reminds me of the quote from Douglas Adams in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where the Babelfish is so miraculous that it can't possibly have evolved on its own. So it proves God, but then therefore there is no longer any faith because there's evidence. So God disappears.
Wow.
Like that. Yeah. They've argued God out of existence. But it's got that kind of absurdity to it. It's like,
thank you, Kelly.
We put God in this little box and then we're able to throw him away. Like, really engage.
I mean, I think the joke is with new atheism. I mean, it's a total snooze, like total bore fest. And, it's tickling itching ears is what it's doing. It's actually moving the conversation forward. But I think we could probably all agree that we're all atheists of a certain type or a certain construct of God.
Of course.
That's easy. Yes. And so it's like, why are we having this conversation? like
I don't believe in that God either.
Yeah, we're all in agreement here. It's just, It's kind of unbelievable.
Thank
But
you for
w- but,
calling
I
that
mean-
out for what it is, Maria, because you're absolutely
Yes.
right. It is honestly the truth. And God forbid that
So
you two
worried.
both be, well, it is. It's like, hello, can we all acknowledge that? And then let's have transformative conversation.
Yeah, but they think they're really onto something there. You know, they love hearing themselves talk. But here's the thing. This is where we go back to the fear bit, because people who have grown up, you know, under a certain understanding of God and Christian understanding, Christian community, you start picking a little bit at their foundation in empirical ways, the way New Atheism does. And that is it. And like their foundations start to crack and crumble, and they are just thrown in complete identity crisis. And my heart goes out to, and I mean, this has been like the demographic of ministry I've done and work I've done for years, you know, and they very quickly spiral into these faith crises, which ultimately is a crisis of identity, because their faith has been who they are their whole life. And they don't really know what to do. They don't have the tools to figure it out. They don't know how to think through things, you know, at this level. And they very quickly check an atheist box, or at best agnosticism, and they stay there out of default, not out of like an educated choice or a choice that they've journeyed to that they can feel good about. And that's why I call kind of the work in the ministry I do post-Christian, because this is where that atheism piece comes in. It's post a certain type of Christianity. It's post a certain type of God. We're saying you can have all that. You're theists and you're atheists alike. You can have all of that. It's in my dust. I don't care. I don't even want to engage you. It's boring and it's not worth my time. And there are better things I can be doing. I want to be asking new questions. I want to be moving forward.
Amen, sister.
Well, I just want to
Go ahead,
add.
Joe. Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry. I mean, just one thing I wanted to quickly add. Beware. God can be said to die, but the attributes of that God can migrate to some other cultural location.
Indeed.
Right? So, for example, you can say that God, the character, dies, but then you can end up worshiping the hidden hand of the market as the thing that brings all things into harmony, the thing whose interests we must serve and we must sacrifice all. Or we can worship the cult of the gun. We must, to whom we must sacrifice our children, and engage in this perennial yearly ritual of bloodletting of our children. It's obscene. We must protect, the right to bear arms.
Yeah.
And to this God, to this conception of a freedom, I'm prepared to sacrifice the children of others, and to some extent even my own. And we think that ancient, cults that sacrificed children were barbaric, and yet we continue to do so daily.
That's the truth, my friend.
So the attributes of God remain stubbornly entrenched even when a certain God dies. So we've got to be very careful here.
This is where we need the capital G somewhere, right? Like if people don't want to be people of faith anymore, they still need the intervening force, right? They still need that underlying moral consciousness / compass. They need something, need a meta narrative, a solidifying narrative to live by. So if that's the cult of the gun, if that's the cult of the market, the cult of Christianity, in my work, I've often critiqued, the fact that people move from, big G God and Christianity to big U universe. Now it's the universe who's in charge. And now it's the universe who's intervening in our lives. And we're really happy to say that. Same attributes, different God.
Yeah.
Right. The universe gave me this lotto ticket. Yeah.
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 And that is just, it's so easy and it's so easy to slip into. And I don't care if people slip into it. I mean, I do a little bit. I mostly just want people to know what they're doing. I want them to understand how they're articulating this stuff and how it actually translates. And I get asked all the time, okay, Maria, so you hang with Radical Theology. So, how do you pray? Do you have spiritual practices? Do you retreat inside? What? And I'm just like, you're asking me to fill holes that a certain construct of God filled. And I'm no longer interested in filling those holes. Like that would just be moving one set of beliefs from here to here. And that's not what I'm doing. I'm subverting everything. We're going in a different direction. We're rethinking the entire operation, not just the one who was at the head, but how it all trickled down.
Wow. So how do we, and
And
I
I've
mean
seen it as a
what I mean is collectively, all of us as teachers and thought leaders in this space, how do we, moving forward, talk to people and get people involved in a more transformative, more active engagement with their spirituality? Because I mean, looking at the world that we're in, we're gonna need it. We need it now.
We,
Um,
man, brother. Yes. Yeah. How does this happen?
John and I are both like, who wants to take?
Is it in conversations like this? Is it as simple as this? I mean, initially, very simply, I would say yes. This is outside of a church. I mean, what we do with this, but is it just not having these kinds of conversations to open power of transformation or enlightenment, whatever? I don't know. Maybe the word doesn't even matter. Whatever. It's just engaging and allowing people to hear the thoughts. Is it as simple as this?
Partly, I think, yes. I do think it has a lot to do with, yes, the conversation and also the commitment to the conversation, to keep the conversation just ever going and to continue to invite people in, because so much of it is about being honest. Not so much, yes, honest with each other, but like we really have to be honest with ourselves. And I think in 21st century Western Christianity, we're really afraid of that, because whatever branch of Christianity you're in, you were taught really to be quite distrusting of yourself and sort of your flesh and, the humanity piece. And so we lean on that big G God. We lean on that personal interventionist God in the sky, or some refer to it as a sky daddy. Do you know what I mean? To sort of lead us and guide us in a certain way. We're not smart enough to not cross the street when we see traffic, because we're perpetually 2 years old. And so our sky daddy, tells us not to cross the street. And people have just, I think, gotten so used to that particular interventionist God being in charge, leading and telling us, what to do at what time. And so it's really, I think, partly healing the relationship with yourself and trusting yourself and understanding that whatever God you may or may not believe in, that you have somehow made it through life to a certain point of life, that you've got a bit of wisdom in you. You've got a bit of sage wisdom and understanding. You've made friendships, you've made relationships, you've had some failures, you've had some victory, like all of that, your narrative of Christianity and what it was and what it is now, like bringing all of that forward into the future and really asking some new questions. And it's hard, this type of curiosity and this word imagination that we've been talking about this whole time, like it is a difficult thing. And once you decide to sort of open your heart and your mind to sort of reimagining faith and what faith can be in life, it's one of those things where it is just a lifelong commitment and a lifelong pursuit. And it sort of takes, I hate to, I'll just say it, but I think it takes years really to start to practice the kind of new questions, because we need new language. We need to articulate things differently. We need to have a different hermeneutic. John mentioned Catherine Keller with theopoetics. For me, John Caputo does a lot with theopoetics. And this idea of what he calls wounded language. Language is always going to fall short. In all of these conversations, we're trying to sort of make material the immaterial and define what is undefinable and understand what is beyond understanding. And we do our best. And I just think it's the commitment to the honest conversations and hard conversations too. And I have some more thoughts on that, but I'm going to go ahead and let John intervene here.
Oh, I'd be happy to listen. No, I say amen to all of that. I think, one of the reasons why modernity has been an age in which God goes missing is that, there are multiple reasons, but let me talk about two. I'm trying to think of the right order. One is, of course, that if if the whole of the universe and the sphere of nature is rendered as a mechanism, then the best God you can have is God the mechanic. And the classical expression of that, of course, is a kind of deism, where God the mechanic gets the thing going, but he's created a mechanism that runs so well that it no longer needs that God to be around to do anything, but perpetual motion machine that keeps going. And all of whose operations can be understood mechanistically, right? So there's no need for the God hypothesis. And the more we understand the workings of the mechanism, the less need there seems to be for any kind of God. And of course, you enter into a resolutely atheist age. I think this is in part what Nietzsche was trying to say, right? It's our impoverished imagination that kills God. And also, when the whole thing is a mechanism, there's no sense of reverence. I mean, it's a kind of radical amputation of our felt sense of wonder. I mean, I'm just looking out at the tree that is dear to me, and even more so dear to my wife. I mean, we just love the sound of these birds on this just elegantly, precisely perched tree, and each leaf evokes a certain kind of wonder, its distinctiveness, and the bird song. But if I look at all of that as like mechanism, I experience no sense of wonder or awe. And where there is no wonder or awe, there is no need for the sacred. It's gone. The expression of the sacred, most viscerally in us, is in our capacity to recognize beauty. And if we're, a world deprived of beauty is a world deprived of any God worth having. So, that death of that God and the replacement of any vital, immanent God with a kind of mechanic who might intervene in the mechanisms in some intervening way now and then, but largely has gone missing. I don't need that God. I don't want that God. That's not any God worth having, right? So I think that is one of the reasons why we all live in a default atheism that is very constitutive of modernity itself. That's where we are. So if we're going to live into some other kind of God, we need another felt sense of the world. So that's pretty clear. And then, of course, the other part is what I said, that the pre-modern God might have been, at least in a certain naive way, I think the theologians always knew this was a problem, right? Might have been too agentially construed, like a being who makes everything happen. Of course, now we have a God who makes nothing happen. But I'm not sure that the God who makes everything happen was theologically credible either. I mean, in its strongest Calvinist form, if you're walking in the forest and a branch breaks off and falls upon your head and kills you, that was the doing of that all-powerful, all-controlling God. So yeah, you had a God that was deeply present in everything, but in a fundamentally controlling and all-determining way. And after science, you can't believe in that God either, right? So you can't believe in the strong doing everything God, and you can't believe in the mechanic God who makes occasional appearances in the mechanism, but largely goes absent. What comes after both those gods are gone? Right? That's the theological question. That's the work of imagination. And actually, there are features of classical theology that are richer than all of these impoverished conceptions. So it's not like you have to make everything up. No one makes everything up ex nihilo, except possibly God, but even that's debatable, right? The process people reject ex nihilo creation to begin with, right? Even God can't create out of nothing. So suddenly I'm thinking about Sound of Music. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. So, yeah, anyway, sorry, a little karaoke. So once those gods have died, the task of theology is not to try to recuperate belief in what has become unbelievable, but to ask, what is the God that can be born?
Wow.
And that's the work,
Yeah. Who is God after God's death?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, Tillich was already talking about the God beyond God, right?
Yeah.
Who is the God that shows up after the God who is an all-powerful being has died?
Of whom we're all an atheist of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even the people who say that they are not atheists don't actually live as though they believe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
This is so much to take in. This has been an amazing conversation, and I wish we had another couple of hours to keep going. I think we got to wrap up here pretty soon. But wow, we've really covered a lot of territory, and this is one of the most quotable episodes I think we've ever. I'm gonna make T-shirts.
There's
Look for
merch
our
opportunities,
folks.
yes, there's merch in here. Maria, John, wow, what a beautiful conversation. It is a reminder that the God is, as I understand it, is alive and well, and this process with you and these conversations are just a strong reminder of the interconnected of it, interconnectedness. Oh, yeah, the work that you're doing is incredible. So delighted to share a few moments with. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It was really special for me to be here with all of you today and with such an esteemed and respected colleague, and thank you so much for everything.
Absolutely ditto. The theme of imagination was sounded first by you. So it feels like we co-created, all of us together, which is partly what we're also trying to do, right?
That's right.
Get us away from the solo generative individual creator to communal creator.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. Recorded at the Bravery Studios in Garfield, New Jersey. All rights reserved. Find our episodes on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And check us out at radicallovelive.com, along with our personal websites at markdilcom.com and kellywilson.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.
If you've ever deconstructed your faith, you know it's not easy. But just imagine if you could have people to guide you through your process. People like Jim Palmer, Kristen Dumais, Jennifer Knapp, Brad Jerzak, Brian Zand, Paul Young, and more. Well, if you head over to www.quoiracademy.com and register for Square 2 using the promo code RAD, you'll get 10% off the regular registration cost of this awesome course and community just for being a fan of our show.
Embark on a journey to the heart of an isolated and restrictive island where secrets simmer beneath the surface. In Brandon Andrus's What Can't Be Hidden, follow Thura as she uncovers the dark truths of Patrida, navigating through betrayal and redemption. This tale of courage, love, and the quest for freedom will captivate you from the very first page. Get What Can't Be Hidden available now from Quoir Publishing.
This Quoircast podcast is brought to you by my book, Unless a Seed Falls to the Ground, Welcoming the Death of the Whiteness Gospel. I wrote this story as a plea for white Christian America to enter into a season of hospice spirituality, to recover from the cancerous lie that we can start over, be in charge, and recover some original purity of Christianity. One friend calls it a love story to the church, the United States, and the entire human family. It's available now on Amazon.
Are you ready to embrace a deeper, more intentional way of living? Introducing Deep Calls to Deep, Meditations for Your Spiritual Journey, Volume 1 by Brandon Andrus. Deep Calls to Deep offers a 1.5 years of weekly meditations to inspire spiritual growth and guide you toward a more meaningful, embodied life. Order your copy today wherever books are sold and begin your journey into greater connection and purpose. Deep Calls to Deep. Let your soul awaken.